Mityana everyone! In this video, we're going to learn about pivot tables in Microsoft Excel. Pivot tables help reorganize and analyze data in various angles. If you learn how to use a pivot table, then managing large data sets will no longer be any problem to you. Let's get started. Kati kati. Alright, before we start creating our pivot table, one thing we need to know is that the source data of the pivot table has to be in a format where all the column headers are at the top and all the associated data has to be at the below. When using large data sets such as these, there can be mistakes and errors inside the data. As you can see in column B, C, and D, all the data formats here are not in a unified format. It is very important to have consistency in data format when especially like data sets like these. So we're going to do data cleaning first before we get into pivot table. And we've touched about data cleaning a little bit at lecture 3. And in this video, we're going to do a little bit more data cleaning. Let's get started. So I'm going to introduce some few manual ways that we can use to clean our data. First, let's copy this worksheet by pressing Ctrl and then clicking and dragging to create a new worksheet, so that when we mistakenly delete or change any data here, we can always go back and restore the data from the original data set. Now in here, let's see column B. In column B, we can see that there are random numbers in front of the name of the revenue source, and I want to delete all of these. To do so, we first select all the range that we want to clean. We can press Ctrl, Shift, and down arrow, and then we can use the replace. To use the replace, we can go to Find and Select and Replace, or we can use the shortcut Ctrl H. Now under here, the dialog box, we're going to find the numbers that we're going to replace. We can see that all of these numbers are different. So finding them one by one and replacing them with the blank would cost a lot of time. One way that we can use is the wildcards. The wildcards in Excel are certain type of symbols that can replace any given character. For example, a question mark will replace any character with a single length. And the asterisk will be able to substitute any character of any length. So in this case, we're going to use this asterisk to replace any numbers here. And then, since the numbers are all followed by a hyphen, we're going to enter in the hyphen. And let's click Replace All. Now we can see that all 28 replacements has been made. And if you close this one, you can see that all of these messy numbers are gone. Now let's go on to column C. Under column C, we can see that all these dates are written in a different format. And we can also see by going to the number group here that this is in a general format. This means these are not in a date format, but in plain texts. So one way that we can use is convert all these dates into a date value and then change them back by applying the same date format. To change all these dates into the date format, we can use the date value function by going equal and then enter in date value. Now you can see that this date value function is explained like this. Date value functions it converts a date in the form of a text to a number that represents the date in Microsoft Excel datetime code. Let's try this one. Let's click on cell C2, and then you can see that cell C2, the date in here, is changed into a certain type of number. So if we click and drag all these down to the cell that we want, we can see that all these dates are changed in the date value. And since we cannot understand these as these are not in the format of date, we can go to number format and then maybe change this one into, let's say, this short date format. And now we can see that all these are in a unified format. Now, since we want to replace all these clean date to this one, we can first copy all of these by using Ctrl C, and then we're going to paste this but paste this as we go to the paste options by pasting it in values and number formatting. What this will do is paste this as a plain value and not an output of a function, and also use the formatting of the date, which would be not general text but date. Now we can see that if we paste this one, it is going to be, as you see in the formula bar here, it's not a function but just a date value. Now we can select these, Control Shift down arrow, and then Control X, and then Control V, and now you can see all of these dates are now replaced with the clean dates. Finally, let's go to column D. Under column D, we can see that all the names of the staff role is in different mixed upper and lowercase. To fix this, we're going to use two functions. The first is the proper function. Let's try and use the proper. Now you can see that under here, the explanation of the function, it says the proper function converts a text string to proper case, the first letter in each word to uppercase and all the other letters to lowercase. So if you test this one at the cell D2, we can see that this one is changed into a proper case where all the first letter is in proper case, all the first letters are in capital and the others are in lower. Now we're going to drag this to the data that we want. Now you can see that all of these are fixed to proper names. However, there are still problems here. As you can see, we have weird spacings inside the words, and I want to change all these spacings to become unified. One way that we can use is the trim function. If we use the trim function, the explanation here says the trim function removes all spaces from a text string except for single spaces between words. So these multiple spaces are going to become just one space. Let's try this one using the H2, and now let's drag this down. Now you can see that all these weird spacings have been fixed. So since we want to replace this clean data with this one, we can do the same by pressing Control C and then paste as values. And then let's delete this original one and cut, Control X, and then we're going to paste. Now we can see that all these messy names have been changed into normal clean names. One final thing is checking whether there are any duplicate values. Now let's first try and sort this so that we can make this see more easily by going to right click and then sort. So let's sort it A to Z. And now we can see, for example here, let's see, this one, you can see that these two rows are identical, as you can see. So we can see that there are multiple data of exact same. So one would be useless, right? And maybe we can see here down, and there are also some same data that are exactly the same. So to replace these, we can go to data, and under here we can see we have remove duplicates. So we click on this, and in the text box we can see that we have all these criteria that we can use to check whether these are in duplicates or not. Now we want to remove the duplicates that are exactly the same across all these columns. If it were to be different in even one column, then it is a different data, so we're going to keep those. So we select all these and let's press OK, and then you can see that 3 duplicate values are found and removed. Now we have our clean data. So we have used data cleaning and cleaned our messy data here. However, we can upload this worksheet to AI such as ChatGPT to ask it to clean the data for us. And it is going to do it very well. It is a very easy way to clean the data. However, one thing that we should always be cautious about is that data like these can contain confidential or sensitive information. And Since AI agents can use its chat records for training data, those information can be breached and it can leak into the internet. So we should always be careful about data infringements, and we should always take care that the AI does not use the chat records as a training data by changing the settings or maybe using a paid version of the AI. Overall, we should always be careful about using data like these with AI, and it is best to be always more than cautious. And also, the latest versions of Microsoft Excel and Microsoft 365 have an embedded AI agent called Copilot. And if we use Copilot, then data cleaning will become very, very easy. Now, in sheet number 2, we have a lot of revenue data here. And also in sheet number 3, we have also some table here that is related to sheet number 2. For now, let's try and enter in the pivot table using this table here. To do so, let's go to Insert and then go to Pivot Table. And from here, we can click on From Table/Range. And this will select the table that we want to insert the pivot table from. And let's insert the pivot table in a new worksheet. Let's click OK. And now we can see that our pivot table has been created. On the left, we can see nothing, but on the right, we can see that we have various fields and all the areas here down below. To start creating a pivot table, we can drag and drop these fields onto the areas here. Now what these fields are, if you go back to sheet number 2, you can see that we have all the names of these column headers, right? And all these column headers are now changed into the fields of the pivot table. First of all, let's go to values. The values area is for calculating certain data that are in the numeric format. For example, we have the amount collected and the monthly target. Let me use the amount collected and drag it down to values. And now we can see that the sum of amount collected is currently showing here. Let's put some fields into the rows. For example, we can use the region. And now we can see the sum of amount collected for each region. If we enter the district above the region, then it's going to create a hierarchy, and we have groups of Mityana and Mpigi as the districts, and under each district we have the region. If we go and enter, let's say, the month in the columns, then you can see that all these columns are going to be divided into months, and we also have the grand total here. If we move this month column down to the rows, then we can see that the format of the table has changed, and all these dates and months are in under the region. And it is also can be grouped by clicking on this, so we can collapse and expand. Now, under here, we can see that all these values are here, right? Let's first collapse all these by right-clicking and collapse, let's say, entire field. Let's go up, and we can see that all these are collapsed. Now, in here, we can change how the numbers are represented. For example, let's right-click and go to Summarize Values by. Currently, it is set to sum, and this is the most reasonable way to look at the data since these are the amount of the revenue. However, we can change it to count, and you can see that this is now representing the number of the data entries here. And maybe we can also change the value to average. And now we can see that these values are representing the average. Let's go and make this into a sum again. Also, we right-click and go to Show Values As, and we can see that we can change this to the percentage. So now it is showing as a percentage. This is a very easy way and effective way to understand data and analyze it by using a pivot table. We can also use the sort data on here to sort all these data to the preferred format. For example, I can sort this from smallest to largest, and now we can see that under each district, we have all these regions in the order from smallest to largest. Let's maybe change these values to no calculation again. And also we can go to sort these names in an alphabetical order. Let's say A to Z, and now you can see that all these are sorted in the alphabetical order. We can also change the design of this pivot table. Let's try and see this more effectively by first expanding the entire field, and then let's go to pivot design here, and under here the layout, we can change all the layout and the design of the table. For example, let's say I want to change the report into an outline form. Then we can see that it has become a different format. Or maybe I can change it into a tabular form, and maybe we can go back to the compact form again. We can also enter in some subtotals. So show all subtotals at the bottom of the group. Now we can see that we have subtotals here. If I want to enter some blank rows, I can do that. And we can change various things under here, the pivot table. We can maybe use the banded rows or change the pivot table styles like this. Now, another thing that we can do in pivot table is enter in a calculated field. Let me show you what I mean. First, let's remove the month so that we can see the table in a more compact form. And maybe let's remove the blank line. And let's see. We currently have the sum of the amount collected. And let's try and enter in the monthly target. We can also check this one. Now we can see that we have the amount collected and the monthly target. But let's say I want to know the difference between the amount collected and the monthly target. I can do so by entering in a calculated field. Let's go to PivotTable Analyze, and under here Calculations, we can see Calculated Field. If we enter this, then we can see that we can change the name of the field and also the formula. Now in this formula, I'm going to use the amount collected. Let's first click and insert field, and then I'm going to type in the operator minus, and then I'm going to enter in the monthly target. Let's try and press OK. Now we can see that we have our calculated field, which is the difference between the amount collected and the monthly target. We can change the name of the title, let's say to difference. Yeah, and this is how we can use the calculated field. If I am not sure about this and I want to check whether this is correct, I can double click the cell and we can see that we have the details so that we can verify its source. This is also a very useful feature. And let's go back to our pivot table, and let's say our data has changed a little bit. Let's go to revenue transactions, and maybe let's change this data into a ridiculously large number. And let's go to our pivot table again. Now, if I want to make this pivot table reflect the change that have been made in the data, let's go to PivotTable Analyze, and let's click on Refresh. Let's say Refresh All. Then you can see that the number that we have changed has been entered here. Let's press Ctrl Z and also Ctrl Z here to return all the changes. So far, we have created a pivot table from a single table. However, we can do more than that. Let's go back to sheet number 2 again. Now, on the sheet number 2, we can see under column G, we have all these revenue codes. And at sheet number 3, we have all these explanations about the revenue code. So if I want to know, for example, I want to know let's say, the responsible department for this transaction ID. The original way that we can use is to use the, for example, VLOOKUP function so that we find the matching revenue code of this transaction ID and then go to this table and return, let's say, the responsible department, which would be the finance department, into this table or any other return field. However, we can easily manage these and see this in a single image using a pivot table. To create a pivot table from multiple tables, we have to create what is called data relationships. To do so, let's go to Data, and under Data Model, we can create relationships. Let's create new relationship. Now under here, let's select the first table, the revenue transactions, and select the column, the foreign column, the revenue code, so that we can see that this column here is the data that are going to be related to the other table. Now we're going to select the related table, which is table in sheet number 3, revenue code details. You can see that the primary related column is going to be at sheet number 3, which contains the original information, and the foreign column is the table that we are seeing here, which has various duplicates, and it is going to draw the data from the original sheet into here. Let's click on OK, and then let's press close. Now we can see that our data relationship has been created. So let's go to Insert and Pivot Table and go and create a pivot table from Data Model. Let's create a pivot table in a new sheet. And let's see here, we can see that under the fields, we have two different tables that we can choose from. And you can see that these two are related to each other. So let's try and enter in from revenue transactions into the values area, the amount collected. And then let's go to revenue code details. And let's say I want the responsible department at the rows. Now you can see that we can see all the amount of collected under each responsible department. You can see that at this table, we cannot see which department is responsible for each transaction. We'll have to go to this different table. However, in this pivot table, all those two tables are combined into a single table so that it is very easy to view all these data. Let's try and format these into comma and then showing no decimal. Now let's try and visualize this data using pivot chart. Let's go to pivot table analyze, and under here we can select pivot chart and enter in a chart about this pivot table. Now this chart is pretty much the same with any other chart in Excel. Let's try and create a filter here by selecting a field and putting it inside the filters area. For example, maybe I can use the region as the filters. Now you can see that we have a filter here. If we click on this one, and let's say I want Uganda as our region. If I press OK, then we can see all the data that are related to this specific region. I can change the filter, and then you can see all the data is changing, and this pivot chart is representing immediately those data. However, there are other ways that we can use the filters. So let's drag it outside and remove the filter. Let's go to pivot table analyze, and in here we can see under filters the slicer and the timeline. First of all, let's try and insert a slicer. Let's click on this one and select the field that we want to use it as a slicer. Let's try and enter in the region again and press OK. Now we can see that we have our slicer. This is pretty much functions the similar way as a filter, but it is much more interactive and easy to use. So if I click on this one, we can see that we are seeing the data only for this region. If I click on the other regions, I can also see that the table is changing immediately. If I want to select multiple regions, I can press Shift to select the continuing fields. And if I press Control and click, I can select also the non-adjacent fields. Now, one more thing, if I click on the pivot table and go to Filter, we have also a thing called Timeline. Now, Timeline is a function that we can use to see all the data in only the preferred time period. If I click on Timeline and see, we can see that if the table contains any date element, then it is going to use them as the timeline. Let's press OK. Now we can see that we have our timeline here. Let's expand this one a little bit here. And let's see. So if I select the preferred period for this table, we can see that this table is only representing the data only in these periods. So maybe from February to October, we can see the data using this timeline. And we can also change the unit of the time. Maybe we can change it to quarters. And let's say I want the third quarter, and we can see all these data in the specific time period. So in this video, we have covered the data cleaning and also the basics of pivot table. You can create a pivot table, and using these slicers and these various timelines to easily visualize and analyze this data. I hope you can practice by yourself and make use of these very useful functions. Thank you for watching. 왜 발라뇨?